Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm going to let some time, about 2 minutes, to let the rest of our members join us today. And we'll get started in a couple of minutes here. But as we are waiting, I highly encourage you to please add in the chat where you're joining us from. We have one of the team members here from Bach, so we'll love to kind of see and scope where our network here is joining us in today. And if you're new to our network, welcome again. My name is Juana Estrada, and I am the events lead here at Latinas in Tech, and I welcome you to our event here. Awesome. Oklahoma, thank you so much for joining us. Angelica from Oklahoma. Awesome. Joining us all here live from Chicago, which today we finally got some snowfall. Well, it's the second snowfall of this year, I would say, which has been nice. I do enjoy the city in Chicago during the winter, so it's always really nice to look at. We got San Diego in the house. Sunny San Diego. I love that. Awesome. I'm seeing in the chat where all the folks joining us in from. Thank you so much again to all of our members for supporting us. And also, if you're new to our network, thank you for joining us on your first event. I'm going to give one more minute for our members to join. And we can get started. Awesome. Well, we'll continue on as we get started here, but I just want to quickly just acknowledge and thank our partner for today, Boggs, for hosting and partnering our event today. Again, if you're new to our network, thank you so much for joining us today for your first event here. And to all of those who are veterans of LIT, thank you so much for joining us as well. What we do here at LIT is provide a space for all of our allies and our members who are Latinas looking to progress in their careers within tech. And we do this by our 3 pillars, which is to provide professional development programming, recruitment opportunities, and most importantly, representation. And so we do this through multiple avenues, one of them being, as today, our events that we have both in person and also virtually. And it's open to all of our network, both if you are an ally or a Latina. And then we have a variety of programs available to you for mentorship, entrepreneurship, and also for professional development. So I highly encourage you to visit our website to learn more about these programs. And if you become a member of LIT, both again, if you are an ally or a Latina, you have access to our 23 plus, actually, not 22 anymore, 23,000 plus members here at LIT. And we have over 20 chapters all across the globe. And yes, I mean the globe. We are in Canada and Mexico. We just actually opened up a chapter in Dublin this year. And we are also in the US all across the States. So I highly encourage you to please scan the QR code here that you see on the screen to learn more about how to become a member, and also to learn more about chapters that are near you and a senior you. I also wanted to remind you all, if you have not yet seen on our website, our Lit Recruit actually will be happening next month. Seeing the demand that we saw this year and all support that we received from our sponsor partners, we're actually going to be doing Lit Recruit once a quarter following next year. And our first Lit Recruit for the year will happen next month. So I highly encourage you all to sign up if you're looking to network with our network, but also to meet recruiters who are actively hiring within our network. This is our virtual career fair that we have once a year. But again, as mentioned, for the demand that we've seen this year, we're going to be actually submitting to it once a quarter. So I highly encourage you to go onto our website to learn more about Lit Recruit, which will happen next year on January 25th. And with that, I would love to pass the mic today to our members here at Box to begin our presentation today. So again, I would love to pass the mic to you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Super excited to meet everyone today and talk a little bit about AI and how we use that to kind of drive some DE&I initiatives. I think Lance, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and kind of get us started.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today. My name is Lance. I am a technical recruiter on the Box recruiting team, and I sit out of Chicago. I use he, him pronouns, and just on behalf of Box, wanted to thank you all for joining us today. Really excited about this event.
Thanks. I'll introduce myself as well. So I'm Tyan Hines. I'm a product manager here at Box, working mostly in kind of the AI and search space. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. I use she, her pronouns, and I am calling in from Seattle, Washington.
We're sharing the screen already for...
Yes. Is it not showing up? All right, hang on. Let me... There we go.
There we go. Awesome.
Cool. So as Tyan mentioned, today we're going to talk about utilizing AI to drive diversity, equity, inclusion, as well as accessibility across your organization. We have a few examples that we'd like to share with you all about how we use AI across our recruiting and people teams, and also our product and engineering teams. So hopefully you can use some of these takeaways and our learnings and apply them to your work. So let's go on to the next slide here. I'd love to just kind of brief everyone on Box as an organization. We are focused primarily in the cloud content management space, but we have quite a few products across our ecosystem that aid in overall workflow automation, as well as collaboration in and outside your company. We're headquartered in Redwood City, California, but we have offices all over the US, as well as in EMEA and Japan. We've got a pretty large engineering team based out of Poland. We've got a pretty large engineering team in Amsterdam as well. So cloud content management is at the core of a lot of our focus, but like I mentioned, we've got quite a few products across the ecosystem, and I'd just like to highlight a few for you just to kind of tie in a holistic view of the company. So probably the most important product that we have is Shield. That's our proprietary security software. It's got some really cool enterprise governance capability, as well as the ability to adhere to a lot of region and industry specific security standards. So that keeps us pretty agnostic in terms of the types of organizations that we can support and where they're located geographically. Another notable product that we've got in our ecosystem is Box Sign. It's an e-signature tool. We've got quite a lot of legal and compliance use cases. So that's one that we're really excited about. And then we also have a whiteboarding tool now called Box Canvas. That's pretty important to us, and we would love to highlight as well. So let's move on to the next slide here. This is just a quick snapshot of some of the industries that we can support, and some notable clients that we're excited about. We can go on to the next slide here. So one of our newest products is Box AI, and there's so many different use cases for this technology that we've been able to leverage across our organization, and Tyan's going to highlight some of the development around that product. But just to share a little bit of context as to how we've used AI across the recruiting team and within my function. Data is huge within recruiting. So not only gathering that data, but also presenting it back to our stakeholders in the business is super important. AI has really helped us summarize and articulate the data that we leverage within our workflows, and build better business justifications so we can not only influence our stakeholders, but keep them informed throughout the process. Another use case that's been really critical for our teams is using AI with our job description creation. One way that our product has been able to help with this is utilizing more inclusive language and triple checking our job descriptions and external postings for biased language that might come up. A third use case that we're really excited about is using AI to help with our outreach messages to candidates. We really want to keep that human element of recruiting, but there are objectively ways that AI can help us better improve some of our processes, especially around refining our message, content, as well as tone, and leveraging the models to help us maybe sprawl resumes or LinkedIn profiles and maybe highlight unique facts about a candidate that we may have missed through some of our sourcing efforts or at first glance. So we're really excited about that. And then finally, a use case that we've been able to leverage across our recruiting teams is using AI to help with our interview questions. So this can really help with creating more tailored interview questions that directly correlate to the job description or role outline, really making our hiring process more objective and based on skills versus maybe emotions or other less objective areas that people highlight within some of their decision-making process. So just a couple of use cases of how AI has bettered my work and impacted our recruiting and outreach efforts, especially from a diversity and inclusion perspective across recruiting. I'd love to turn it over to Taya now to chat a little bit about how AI has impacted her work and to share some context on the development of the product.
Thanks so much, Lance. We'll definitely dive a little deeper in some of those things that he mentioned and kind of talk a little bit about it. So just to kind of frame the rest of this, one of the big things that I've been working on the last year is connecting the content that Box stores for our customers to LLM technology like we see with ChatGPT. We call that Box AI, but for the purposes of the talk here, it really doesn't matter. It would work for kind of any LLM that you're connecting with. And as we went through this process, I learned a lot of really interesting things that I think really are important in the DE&I space, as well as, we did some kind of interesting things along the way in terms of our processes to really make sure that as we were building this product, we integrated DE&I principles into the product development and creation. So we'll talk a little bit about both. So starting off, I'm just going to talk about kind of using AI in general to support DE&I and kind of go in a little more detail. Lance gave us a really great kind of intro that focused in on kind of one set of workflows. We'll talk about some other things that you can use as well. And that's really just everybody can do that generally in their role. And then we'll go into kind of how I incorporated DE&I principles into my workflow and how you can do that as well. We'll talk a little bit about, where you can, no matter what your role is, where you can maybe jump in and kind of advocate for that. And then at the end, I'll kind of give you a real world example of something I did that, I think really helped with accessibility using AI. So let's start a little bit about kind of just the general benefits of AI. And I want to start with this because I know in the news, there's been a lot of, we see a lot of articles about how AI can be very disruptive and it's a little scary and maybe something like, bad is going to happen and there's security issues. And there's definitely a lot happening in that space, but there's a lot of benefit to AI as well if we're using it in ways that really can drive forward DE&I initiatives. So accessibility, I think, is something that's first of mind to me, and that's really being able to use AI to explain documents at a specific level of understanding. This has been so key for me this year. I'm reading through a lot of technical documentation, especially a lot of papers related to like machine learning. And so it's been super helpful to be able to use AI to just sort of give me summaries or kind of rewrite things in a way that's a little easier for me to access. So I really love that. We'll talk a little bit at the end about, how we can support some accessibility guidelines, specifically the web content accessibility guidelines. We already talked a little bit about recruiting, anonymizing resumes, being able to rewrite those job descriptions with inclusive language, and identifying potential bias and feedback. So I think that's a really great way for us to start leveling the playing field for everybody, because we know, that depending on certain things that you put in your resume, it may bias people, whether they mean to have that bias or not. And so this is just a really fantastic way that we can start removing some of that. And so we can make the recruiting process as unbiased as possible. There's some great things you can do with AI to really help in career development for yourself, or if you're a manager. So of course, removing biased language from performance feedback. I think this is super helpful if you're writing performance feedback for other people, to be able to make sure, hey, am I using anything that perhaps it has a bit of a gender bias or some sort of role bias. And it's not the direct like words. Where we get is things like rock star and kind of things like that, or there's other kind of languages that tend to be associated with a particular gender or perhaps a particular role or location. And AI actually can understand a lot of that and help us remove those. So it is a really nice way to make sure that we're writing consistent performance feedback for everybody. And then, of course, I do the same thing on my self-reviews, where I actually use AI to kind of rewrite it as well and give me some suggestions so that I can make sure that I myself am not falling into any biases and that I am representing myself accurately and not using some of this biased language about my accomplishments. Kind of digging into a little deeper, we're talking about safer language. This is really more about some people in their roles will have need to have to interact with particular language that may be really harmful or triggering. And AI can be used to kind of come in and help filter that or translate it a little bit so that you're not having to directly read or interact with kind of that language that might be problematic or harmful for you. And so that can be a way to still continue kind of interacting with a piece of content without having to worry about that. Let's say, you work in a legal space and perhaps there's some documentation that has, some language that is inappropriate because perhaps it was a quote from somebody or it's a description of something that happened. We can use AI to help rephrase that so that we're not having to be have to deal with that kind of language. And then, of course, recommend alternatives to potentially biased or offensive terms. Again, really using AI to help make that language safer. And in this sense, we use safe as making sure that the language doesn't cause any really negative or uncomfortable reactions. And AI is actually pretty good at this. So that's another one. And then improved learning. Obviously, you can use AI to help improve, your information retrieval. This is where that like asking questions and getting answers thing is just super, super useful because you can maybe, if you have a document and somewhere in that this Word doc, I know I have the answer, but I can't find it. You can use AI to help you find that answer much quicker. And so it can really save a lot of time. The other thing that I think people don't necessarily think of as much is because these models are a little generative, so they can kind of create new ideas and new things, or maybe repackage something in a slightly different way that might actually kind of make you think a little bit and give you a new perspective on something that you're doing or some piece of, writing. And so that can be useful as well. Obviously, you want to use your own judgment for all of these things and not just take the AI directly at its word, but these are some things that you can certainly do just all the time, every day for yourself, to make sure that you're using AI and using it to help you with your own sort of processes. But now I want to kind of jump into a little bit about the process that we went through as we were sort of developing our product and how we used it to sort of incorporate DE&I principles into the process and how you can do the same. Now, I'm a product manager, so some of this is going to come a bit from the product management perspective, but I think there's definitely things here that can apply to everybody, no matter what your role is. And I think that's one of the things that we all agree, we kind of need to share this together. And I will say, if you're in an organization where you feel comfortable speaking up, I think these are some things that you can certainly talk about and advocate for as you're kind of building products or, creating workflows or doing whatever your kind of, whatever your job is. So the first thing that I think is really helpful is to kind of come up with some sort of guiding set of principles. And I know, most companies have they have principles that they talk about, and they sort of display them. I think this is a little different than that. What I'm saying here is more think about 4 things that you're doing. Yes, think about some of those business goals and those business guiding principles, but also think a little bit more about if there's sort of maybe more moral or ethical considerations for your business. This really depends on kind of what you're doing, the makeup of your team, lots of different factors. But there may be things that are not really necessarily business related goals, but are still really important to you as a person directly, or you as an organization. And you want to be able to kind of codify those somewhere so that you all are in agreement, like, hey, this is really important. So some examples here. This is what Box did in terms of like how we're using AI. Again, this is specifically focused on AI, but you could kind of do this with anything. And when we very first got started with this project, we realized we had to make a lot of decisions about how we were handling privacy, how we were handling security, how transparent we wanted to be about what we were doing. And so we sat down as a group and sort of figured out, like, what do we care about? And so you can see in this list, some of these things are business goals, right? We want to have strict adherence to permissions, data security. These are things that are super, super important to Box as an organization. And we have higher level business goals around those. But you can also see we have some things in here that are not necessarily tied directly to business goals, but are more things that we felt were important, for us in guiding us making decisions. So things of like explanations of AI output. So we're trying to be really transparent. That was just something that we felt was really important, and being as transparent as possible with our customers, because we valued that. And so it was something that we wanted to sort of build in. So I think that's a good thing to start with. As we were kind of getting started, we also solicited a lot of feedback from different groups as part of our planning phases. And we specifically asked people to sort of think about what are ways that we can use this product that we're building to benefit groups that have been historically marginalized or underrepresented. And the reason we sort of called this out directly in this process is, I think, especially in tech, sometimes we sort of don't think about the wider implications of some of the things that we're doing. And so it was helpful to really sort of deliberately sit down and think about, like, how could this be used? And also, how could this be used in a way that might be harmful to these groups or might reinforce some existing bias? And as part of that process, we did encourage people to ask some pretty hard questions. And we got into some pretty deep ethical conversations, which was super fascinating. And I think it was really valuable. We made actual product decisions based on kind of the output of all of this. So one example is, when you're interacting with an AI model, you have your question and then you get an answer back. There's a couple different ways that Box could have handled that. We could have decided, like, hey, that's important. We're gonna save it, and that way we can use that to reinforce answers and make sure that we're improving the answers that we're giving over time. We could also say we consider that content, which means we don't have access to it. You can keep it. Or we could just say, yes, this is really important, but we think there's some pretty big privacy concerns, and so we're not going to save it at all. And I think from a product perspective, the first one of being able to kind of save that data, improve your product is really compelling. But we actually chose to not save any of the questions or the answers with their initial rollout, because we felt that there was a potential privacy issue. So say if I'm going and I'm asking a question on an HR doc about how do I get accommodations for disability, that might imply that I have a disability and I may not want to disclose that. And if my questions or answers are being saved, somebody else has access to that. So really thinking these things through and making sure that we're kind of taking those sort of use cases in mind as we build the product. So continuing on that, after, as we were building the product, we did a ton of testing, really looking to improve quality, but also to check for biases and harmful results. And so we kind of defined, here's a set of things that we don't want to have happen. And how do we design tests to make sure that doesn't? So I have a couple examples here. These are very kind of specific to our organization. So I'll kind of walk you through, but I think there's ways to kind of incorporate that anytime you're using AI. Essentially what we're doing here is we're asking our version of AI to complete a sentence or create a sentence, choosing from a list of words that are gendered or potentially neutral when we have person, right? And then the idea is the LLM will choose a word to put in, and they choose that word randomly. And then if we do that across a whole bunch of different questions, we can actually see, does the LLM have a bias? And we can even look at, was that question sort of a positive question, or was that phrase sort of a positive phrase or a negative phrase? So what I mean by that is, when you look at the second example, the first answer is, the woman walked gracefully down the street, catching everyone's attention. Okay, so that's, on the surface, it's a positive thing, but that also could potentially be very biased, especially if sentences like that almost always have woman in them versus man or person. And so wanting to be really careful to make sure that we're not sort of, as we produce answers, reinforcing those existing biases. So that was definitely something that we paid attention to. And then once we had built the product, we started cascading it to broader teams to get feedback. And this is where I went to HR and to our employee resource committees kind of early in the process, demoed the product, and then talked a little bit about some of the positive and negative implications of AI and the product that we were building, and gathered feedback and really asked people to, again, kind of highlight things that they're worried about or give us suggestions about things that we could try. And I think it's just so important to, whatever you do and whatever your work role is, to be aware of sort of your biases and your limitations, and make sure that you're taking that into account and seeking, kind of other viewpoints. And I think it's super critical to be able to kind of take that pause and do that, right? Because I don't know what I don't know. And there are going to be certain, biases that I'm going to have that I won't necessarily even know about. And so there might be scenarios that it won't occur to me to think about. And so wanting to, in that process, really build that into how we were doing things to make sure that we're getting that really wide feedback. Now, this is one where, you have to be a little cautious, because obviously, yes, we're going to groups and asking them for some support, but also, we need to be respectful and recognize that some of these groups that we're going to are current, marginalized groups that have been historically underrepresented in tech. And it's not really fair to make them, bear the burden of trying to make our product unbiased. Like, that's not their job. So again, we made this optional. We gave people, the ability to provide feedback, but we didn't enforce it, because we wanted to make sure that was, something that people could provide, but they didn't have to feel obligated about it. And another thing, it's kind of crammed on the bottom here, but actually it was built into the process, is we built accessibility within mind from like the ground up. So any UI elements that we had were created with accessibility in mind from the beginning. It wasn't something that we added after the fact. And in fact, you can't get through our engineering process without actually having accessibility and in mind, like in your product, and building tests and passing them. And this, I think, was also really helpful, because so often when it comes to kind of these accessibility features, they are things that are sort of tacked on after the fact. And of course, it's so much harder to build in accessibility when you're doing it later. And you can run into all kinds of challenges there. So for us, being able to really build this in from the beginning was super, super helpful. So walking through kind of all of those, you can see that, at each step, we worked really hard to sort of build in ways to think about what we cared about, to think about, ways that we can incorporate DE&I into the process. And again, I said that this, because I'm a product manager, it's very product management focused. But I think in other roles, you can advocate for these as well. So for example, if you're a designer, right, you can really help develop, a design that really takes accessibility into mind. If you're an engineer, you can really kind of make sure that you're building tests, that can check for biases, and that if you're creating designs and architectures for systems, that you're thinking a little bit about, is this something in this system that might potentially reinforce some existing bias or might introduce some bias into whatever we're doing. So I think no matter what your role is, you do have the opportunity to be able to kind of build this in, and encourage others to build this in as well. Now, I recognize not everybody's in an organization where that is easy to do. So of course, take this all and apply it within your context. And if your context is we can't, then that's fine too. But I think it's helpful to just sort of understand some of the ways that you can incorporate this in. And for us, we felt like it produced a product that we were really proud of, that was accessible to people who were using assistive technologies, and that we felt was not going to be reinforcing kind of existing biases or introducing elements of risk to individuals and organizations around kind of the safety of the content. So for us, that was a really, really great outcome. And I think that first step of being able to sort of define our values has also been super useful, because as we've kind of been continuing our journey with AI and ML, we've had to make a lot of kind of product decisions about the directions that we're taking. And we can go back to those principles and see, what does that say? So when it comes to transparency, right, like that's something that a lot of companies don't necessarily provide when it comes to sort of machine learning. And that's fine. It just ended up being something that we care about. And so we want to, we're continuing to make product decisions based on the fact that we want to be transparent with our customers about what we're doing. And again, there's sort of an intangible benefit to that. There's not a direct impact to our bottom line. So it was really more about how we, what was important to us as an organization and as individuals working in this space. So I want to just give one example of sort of a way that I personally used this to sort of help me sort of improve the accessibility of things, and kind of talk a little bit about how I went through this. So this is a real world example of kind of using AI to improve the accessibility of a particular kind of language. I talked earlier about how I've been spending a lot of time reading a lot of technical articles and learning a lot, and that's great, but a lot of that is super hard for me to understand. I don't have an engineering background, so I don't necessarily have kind of the same background that some of my peers do that I work with. And so for me, there are just some things that I don't know as much. So that's great. I know I need to sort of like make this text more accessible so that I can understand it better. How do I go about that? So I'm super big into these web content accessibility guidelines. It is a set of guidelines for online content, talking about how to achieve a certain level of accessibility. And there are a lot of things about how you design, web content so that it can be accessible to assistive technologies. But there's also a really important piece that's about the language itself. And this sometimes is very, very hard to be able to make it accessible because it's kind of a fuzzy thing. So here's some example of some of them, but just to sort of like talk through it. It's basically saying, the first one is saying, hey, don't use idioms, don't use jargon, don't use really unusual language. Make sure that you're kind of explaining all of those. The second one is basically don't use abbreviations or explain them. And then the third one is make sure that you're writing something at a level that the general population can understand. So this is a piece of text that I actually read that I had a hard time kind of accessing the first time, right? And in the world of like AI and kind of like LLMs right now, vector embeddings is just a big thing that everybody's super into. Happy to talk about it in the Q&A if anybody really, really wants to dive like into that. I can nerd out about it all day. But since probably most of you don't, it doesn't really matter. It's a technical topic that I've been spending a lot of time on. And, to kind of get just an entry level understanding of what this is, I obviously went and looked up like some, definitions. And here is one of the ones that I got from a very respected organization that works in this space. And there's a lot in here that the average person wouldn't necessarily be able to understand. We're talking about numerical representations and product vectors, ML algorithms, sentimental analysis. Like, whoa, if you don't have a background in this, like it's really hard to understand what all of that means. So what I did is I actually wrote like a query, like a question that I used to process that particular text so that I could get something that was a little easier for me to understand. And this is the exact one that I wrote, right? Rewrite this definition to be at a lower secondary education level, remove or explain all jargon, expand all acronyms and abbreviations, and rephrase any idioms. And again, influenced by sort of those WCAG guidelines that I showed previously, but you could substitute kind of anything that helps you. I do know that our teams in Poland actually use AI a lot to sort of take a lot of these articles and translate it into Polish so that they have access to it. So that's another really kind of fun way that they're using it to make it more accessible. Using this prompt is able to come up with a more accessible definition. So what you'll see here is they've removed a lot of the language around things like sentiment analysis and ML platform and kind of all this sort of stuff. And they have something that's a little easier to understand. Again, it's not super important that we go through this, but as I read through this, I was like, okay, I think I get that. It's definitely more understandable to me than the previous one. But just to be sure, we can actually do even better than that. And so what I did is I kind of took it back a little bit more and said, rewrite this definition to be shorter and at a 5th grade level. And then I had the same remove or explain all jargon, expand all acronyms and abbreviations, and rephrase any idioms. And the idea here is, okay, give me like a really, really simple, really easy thing to understand so I can get that. And then I can read the slightly more complicated one that I showed on the previous slide. And then once I've understood that, then I can go to the original text if I need to and fill in the details if I need to have that level of understanding. And so what I ended up was getting something that's just a paragraph. And if you read through it, it actually takes this very complex concept of vector embeddings and makes it so simple that like, a 5th grader can understand it. And this was super great because something like this gives you a place to start. Like, okay, I understand now a little bit about what this thing is trying to do. And then I can start going into a little more detail and kind of working my way up to complexity. And so for me, this was super helpful to understand. It's also helpful for me because I do have ADHD. And so sometimes long pieces of text are really hard for me to follow through and kind of process. And so for me personally, being able to have access to something like this has been really helpful because it does allow me to still access, information at the same level that everybody else does in a way that makes more sense to my brain specifically. So that has been super helpful for me. So that's kind of everything that we went through. So just to kind of like highlight, as we're going through this whole expansion of AI, definitely think about the ways that AI can be beneficial to you and the people around you. Look for those opportunities and definitely, embrace them when you can and when you feel comfortable. Think about ways that, you can kind of incorporate some of these DE&I processes and like concepts into your processes and sort of trying to reframe some of the tech work from a slightly different perspective, so that you're really thinking about DE&I on the same level as sort of like your technical design. And then obviously, with examples like this, find a couple of things. If there's something that you regularly do that perhaps is a little hard or challenging, you can often, if it's related to language, you can often use AI to help improve that accessibility, or maybe reduce the burden to access something, or allow you to get something done faster. So a lot of benefit here in this space, and definitely a lot of ways that we can incorporate DE&I. And personally, the reason that this is like so something that I care so much about is being in tech, and having been here for a while. I often in my career have been the only woman in the room. And what that means is tech has been built from a particular perspective that does not necessarily represent the world as a whole. And because of that, we have products that don't necessarily represent or support everybody that they could. And so as we're sort of going through this AI journey, all of us together with these new technologies, just really want to make sure that we're encouraging as many people as possible to participate in the process, and really speak up, so that as we're sort of developing this new thing, we have many, many voices and many, many different opinions, so that we can make sure that this new field really develops with kind of everybody's perspectives and needs in mind. All right. Thank you. I appreciate so much all of you listening. Definitely have some time for questions if people would like to either come off mute if you want, or certainly there's a bunch of questions in the meeting chat as well that we can start going through.
Thank you so much, Diane. I love the way you wrapped it up at the end. I really felt that testament, and I agree with you 100%. So again, thank you to you and your team for your hard work behind the scenes and making sure that this product is both inclusive, but also to accessible to all of us. I would love to now offer anybody here in this room to go off mute if you want to ask a question. If not, I'm happy to read them out loud. We do have a couple of questions here in the Q&A, so definitely want to open it up to the floor. Awesome. I have a question here in the Q&A actually that says, can you share more about how the team got diverse perspectives from underrepresented groups, and where were those certain groups or forums, whether they went, and who were involved?
Yeah, so that's a really a great question. So in terms of like, as we were developing the product, it was a lot of me going to different people within Box as a company, and really seeking out people who were in different roles, who had different backgrounds, who had different levels of technical expertise, and asking them a lot of questions about how they would use a product like this, but also giving them an opportunity to sort of express their concerns. And it was a very deliberate choice along the way to make sure that we were kind of including that. And I did a ton of reading, as did other people on my team, to sort of see like what was out there as well in terms of research in this space. And then once that product was developed, that's where I did an initial presentation to kind of our HR team, and kind of talked a little bit about some of the ways that I thought AI could be beneficial, as well as some things that I thought that HR in particular should be concerned about. And then I also did a presentation to leadership of our employee resource groups. Again, kind of talking a little bit about some of the benefits, and also really, really encouraging people to encourage their members to participate. We had some Slack channels that we also set up, that we encourage people to ask questions. And then it was just really making, my team, we made ourselves available. We answered as many questions as we could, so that people felt comfortable coming to us. And we always said, if you don't want to share in a public forum, you can ping us directly. We can have a Zoom call, whatever works for you, so that we can really get that feedback and gather that diverse set. And we paid attention to make sure that, you know, at each point in the process, we had a good representation across many different kinds of diversities. So.
For clarifying and adding more to that. Thank you again. I do see some in the chat, so let me find them. Actually, mostly of these comments are praises, so that's actually good. But definitely want to open up the floor to anybody who wants to come up to me and ask a question to our members here at Box.
Now's your opportunity to ask me those hard questions if you want. Like I said, that was definitely something that we spent a lot of time along the way, is making sure we gave people that opportunity. So feel free. As you saw, transparency is one of our principles. So happy to dive into details with you.
Sorry.
Did I hear someone go off mute? Sorry.
Yes, that was me. Hi, everyone. I'm Yvonne Torero. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. I unfortunately came in a little bit late, and I just wondering if you could share with us kind of how was your initial journey into like diving into AI and saying, you know what, I am going to utilize the tool to bring benefit, right? But also, yeah, like any resources you might share about, you know, learning about large language models, and again, diving into resources that are like at that 5th grade level, and then incremented the difficulty, I guess you might say it that way.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. So I had a little bit of a head start because I have kind of worked in this machine learning space for a little bit. So that did help a little bit. I hadn't dove into vector embeddings models too much, so that was why that particular one was something I had to sort of dive into. In terms of kind of places to go for information, if you're looking to kind of learn more about LLMs specifically, there's a really great training by Andrew Ng, so NG, that talks a lot about prompt engineering. And that doesn't focus so much on what's happening on the back end of LLMs, but it very much focuses in on how you as a user can get something valuable out of them by making sure that you're asking your question in the right way. For many people, I think that's a really great way to kind of start in this journey, because then you're understanding the output, and that's something that people can often anchor to much more easily than the technical piece. When it comes to learning kind of the background on the more technical side, there's actually, if you just type in like, you know, what is an LLM, you get actually some really good resources from Google. And I think places like Elastic is a good one, Pinecone. There's a couple of organizations that have some really good explanations. And these are things that spaces that they work in, but they've, in some cases, made extra efforts to try and give some explanations that are a little less technical. But again, I used AI to help me understand AI. So it was a little meta, but it was kind of entertaining.
Thank you for that. I've definitely asked ChatGPT to give me some high definitions and then provide resources as well. So always looking to learn more. If anyone has any more questions, if no one else has any more questions, I do want to know how Box is using AI to provide accessibility, to create accessibility across your website and your page and things like that. That's something I've worked on in the past to enhance the usage of the app and kind of, you know, how accessible it is for those individuals who have a hard time navigating pages. Yeah, so I wonder if you could share about that.
Yeah, so you know, we have kind of a couple initiatives, some of which do involve AI and some of which do not. We do build everything with kind of accessibility in mind, and we have like a standard set of kind of accessibility guidelines that we follow for any sort of user-facing experience. And we actually have a PM who, like, that is what he's dedicated to. So one of his roles is accessibility, and he actually was hired as our PM of accessibility. And so he's done a fantastic job of going around and making sure that the teams have all the tools that they need to be able to work accessibility into their processes and their designs, as well as, you know, having conversations about other ways that we can improve accessibility. So this WCAG kind of guidelines that I used, and that prompt that I showed you, the first one, that actually came out of a conversation that I had with him, because we were talking about, okay, you know, we can meet these standards for the most part, but when it comes to language, that is really, really difficult because it's kind of subjective. And so we spent some time sort of working together to figuring out how can we get to that point. And use that. So we have that available, and we do encourage, when we talk to our customers about this particular product, we do talk to them about the fact that they can take some existing, you know, document that they have stored within Box, and then they could use AI to be able to find information faster, or be able to kind of summarize or give them these, you know, sort of easier to access pieces of information. So that is one way directly that we're kind of encouraging our customers, like, hey, let's make your content more accessible by making it easier for you to find the answer that you need, or whatever kind of understanding you need out of the existing documents that you have.
Very nice. Kudos to Box for that.
Thank you so much, Anne, for taking the time to explain that. And thank you so much, Iman, for asking the questions out loud. I would love to invite anybody else who wants to come off mute or camera to ask questions. We do have a couple minutes remaining too, so this will be the final question before we wrap up.
There's a couple of questions in the chat.
Yes, I see here from Alina, who said, would you please provide some good practices to keep biases out of interaction with AI? She's mentioning that they're taking a course with Coursera, and they're learning about how much of the user can be influenced by the outputs as well as the buckets. So talking a little bit more on just best practices on how to not be so biased interacting with AI.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there's kind of two levels. When it comes to sort of that like more surface level of something that's pretty obviously biased, we specifically make sure that we review kind of all of the like large language model providers that we're interacting with and that we're partnering with, to make sure that they sort of meet our standards in terms of what we want their output to be. So when we're talking about, say, OpenAI, they have actually a really large set of tests that they do to actually test for bias in their results that they're providing. They've also done some work to specifically train their model so that it is less biased and less likely to return an answer that we would consider harmful. So that's sort of the first step of kind of filtering out like the more obvious stuff. It gets trickier when you're trying to look at biases kind of across, a document or many documents, or you're trying to look at a bias that maybe is a little less obvious. So this example that I had of like, if you're writing a job description, you're saying, I'm looking for a rock star. Seems like a perfectly straightforward thing to say, but studies have shown that putting that in your job description actually reduces the number of women who are going to apply for that role because they associate that with sort of a particular, kind of and way of working that they feel excluded from. So that is, again, where asking it, kind of AI to rewrite some things and suggest alternate language. Sometimes you can find ways to say the same thing that is potentially a little less biased. And you can explicitly ask it to remove biased language. For something like Rockstar, there's definitely kind of publicly available information about that. And so it would be able to catch that. But it's always kind of worth thinking and looking at the different results. But still, in many cases, especially for those more subtle ones, a human has to be involved. They're not, as much as we talk about AI and how, advanced it is, it's still not a replacement for people. There's still at some point, you kind of have to use your human understanding to make sure you're making that choice of whether, this content or this content is better. So I think, Melissa, it looked like you had a question too about the challenges and opportunities I see using AI in the education space, particularly with equity and inclusion in admissions. Yeah, that's quite a topic right now. Definitely been a lot around admissions in the news and kind of equity in that space. Again, I think this is, an opportunity to make sure that you're judging everything kind of equally. And so that's where being able to do some of this anonymization and perhaps sort of rephrasing some of the applications that you get, just to make sure that you're not introducing some bias accidentally because somebody has a particular name or they come from a particular place. So you're kind of helping make sure that, that field is a little more level. So I think that's certainly an advantage. That's a whole complex topic to get into. I think there's other ways personally that we can kind of do a better job in that particular space that don't necessarily involve AI. But really that first step of making sure that language is as unbiased as possible is really, really helpful. And in terms of inclusion, again, it's just really making sure that we're giving people access to the tools that they need to, produce a good submission, so they can really focus on like what makes me special and important as a person, to really make sure that their application is competitive. And so, they can kind of highlight those other things that beyond like test scores that universities are looking at. I think this is a space that there's gonna be a lot of research in, and we just have only just touched the surface of it. So.
No, I highly agree on that too. I think that there's just so much more to explore. This is for sure. And we do have a couple questions in regards to that too, that we can wrap up here. There's two questions similarly. They can kind of tie in. One is, what process are you using to check on your current product that you're developing? And also too, like what resources are you utilizing to stay up to date with AI standards and regulations?
Yeah, this is a space that's changing rapidly. I'm very fortunate that we just have an amazing team that covers security, legal, and compliance at Box. So they have all gotten a crash course in AI this year. And so they have been spending a lot of time kind of keeping track of regulations and what's happening. We also read a lot of that as well. We know there's more coming. President Biden his office released kind of some guidelines recently about AI. Not anything really specific about what needs to happen, but sort of a preview of what's to come. There's definitely EU for sure has kind of some stuff they're doing there. So we spend a lot of time not just reading the technical articles, but also reading kind of the legal and compliance landscape as well. And it is really hard to stay on top of right now, which is why so many of us are involved, because it really takes a huge team to be able to be fully, up to date with kind of all the changes, because it's just evolving really, really rapidly right now.
And again, just thank you so much for being so top of mind of making sure that this product is inclusive and available to all of our members here. And again, to the team of Box here, thank you again for your time being with us today. We appreciate it. And to all of our members here in the chat, say a lot of thank yous flowing in. Thank you for joining us today. And we'll be sharing this information with you via recording post event. So keep up to date with that as well. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you.